The story I'm about to share with you is truly unbelievable. I recently purchased a mansion and discovered a mysterious doorless room. Let's begin from the very start. It was a steal, an absolute steal. A Victorian mansion, practically a castle, for the price of a compact car. John, a lover of all things old and creaky, couldn't resist. The house sat on Harbinger Lane, shrouded in overgrown ivy and whispers of forgotten tragedies. The realtor's warnings did little to dampen John's enthusiasm. He envisioned restoring it to its former glory, his own haunted mansion. He signed the papers, ignoring the uneasy feeling in his gut. He was now the proud owner of 13 Harbinger Lane. John spent the first few days exploring. Each creaky step, each cobweb-laden chandelier fueled his excitement. He had his work cut out for him, but the house held promise of a story. He started with the attic, a cavernous space filled with dusty furniture and forgotten memories. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the grime-coated windows, casting long, dancing shadows. John, armed with a flashlight and a hammer, felt a thrill course through him. This was his adventure now. The air hung heavy with the scent of decay and something else.
Something akin to old books and damp earth. John coughed, waving away a spiderweb that clung to his face.
He moved deeper into the attic, his flashlight beam dancing across faded portraits and broken toys. The house seemed to watch him, its silence punctuated by the occasional groan of settling wood. He found himself inexplicably drawn to a particular corner, shrouded in shadows. As he approached, he felt a chill, a sudden drop in temperature. His flashlight flickered, then died. John cursed under his breath, fumbling for fresh batteries. The darkness seemed to press in, suffocating. He finally got the flashlight working, the beam shaky as he shone it on the corner. His blood ran cold. There, partially hidden by a tattered tapestry, was a doorway. A doorway leading into darkness. A doorway that hadn't been there before. John's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't explain the feeling of dread that washed over him.
Curiosity warred with fear. John, ever the pragmatist, reminded himself that it was probably just a closet, an old, creepy closet. He took a deep breath and pushed aside the tapestry, revealing the doorway in its entirety. It was then that he realized something was very wrong. There was no door, no hinges, no frame, no handle. Just a gaping maw of inky blackness. John shone his flashlight into the opening, but the beam seemed to disappear after a few feet, swallowed by the darkness. He reached out a hand, his fingers met only with a bone-chilling cold. The air grew heavy, making it difficult to breathe. A low hum vibrated in the air, barely audible, yet it seemed to resonate deep within John's bones. He felt a presence, something ancient and malevolent. It was watching him. He could feel its eyes on him, cold and calculating. Panic welled up inside him. John stumbled back, tripping over a loose floorboard. He scrambled away from the doorway, his heart pounding a frantic tattoo against his ribs. He didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed, listening to the house settle around him, every creak and groan sending shivers down his spine. Shadows danced on the walls, cast by the headlights of passing cars. Or were they? He could have sworn he saw a figure flit past his doorway. A tall, gaunt figure that vanished as quickly as it had appeared. He told himself it was just his imagination, fueled by the stories he'd heard about the house. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. The next day, John tried to ignore the events of the previous night. He focused on the renovations, determined to prove that he hadn't made a mistake buying the house. He hired a contractor, a burly man named Frank, who clearly didn't believe in ghosts. John didn't tell him about the doorless room. He wasn't sure why, but he felt it was best kept secret. Frank started on the plumbing, while John tackled the living room, stripping away layers of wallpaper. As he worked, he thought he heard voices, whispers, just on the edge of hearing. They seemed to be coming from the walls, murmuring his name. John tried to rationalize it, blaming it on the old pipes or the wind whistling through the cracks. But the whispers persisted, growing louder, more insistent. He could almost make out words now. Words spoken in a language he couldn't understand, yet felt deep in his soul. He tried to ignore them, to focus on his work, but it was no use. The house was getting to him. He felt it chipping away at his sanity, his resolve. One afternoon, as John was working on the fireplace, a cold wind swept through the house. It slammed doors shut, rattled windows, and sent a chill down John's spine. The fireplace roared to life, flames dancing wildly as if possessed. John stumbled back, his heart racing. He could have sworn he saw a face in the flames, a grotesque, contorted face with eyes that burned with an unholy light. He blinked, and it was gone. John, now truly terrified, fled the house. He didn't stop running until he reached his car. He sat there for a long time, his breath coming in ragged gasps, trying to calm his racing heart. He knew then that he had made a terrible mistake. This house was not meant for the living. The floor plan. He needed answers. John drove to the local library, his mind racing. He had to find out what he was dealing with. He spent hours poring over old documents, town records, anything that could shed light on the history of 13 Harbinger Lane. He finally found it, tucked away in a dusty corner, a floor plan of the house dated 1888. His blood ran cold. The floor plan showed all the rooms he had seen, all except one. There was no mention of a room behind the tapestry in the attic. John's mind reeled. He had to get out of the house. He had to get away from whatever evil lurked within its walls. He raced back to Harbinger Lane, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to get his things and leave. He couldn't stay there another night. As he pulled up to the house, he noticed that the front door was wide open. A cold dread washed over him. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he was walking into a trap. "Get out!" He stepped inside, his hand shaking as he reached for the light switch. Nothing. The power was out. The only light came from the moon shining through the grimy windows, casting long, eerie shadows across the walls. "Hello?" John called out, his voice trembling. Only silence answered him. He took a tentative step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "Who's there?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. A cold wind slammed a door shut somewhere in the depths of the house. John jumped, his heart racing. He could hear whispers now all around him, echoing through the empty halls. They were louder now, more insistent, filled with a rage that made his blood run cold. "Get out!" a voice hissed in his ear. John spun around, but there was no one there. He was alone. Or was he? He could feel eyes on him, watching his every move. He had to get out of the house. Now! He stumbled towards the front door, his hand outstretched, desperate to escape. Trapped. But as he reached for the doorknob, he felt a cold hand clamp down on his wrist. He screamed and tried to pull away, but the grip was too strong. He turned to face his attacker, his blood turning to ice. Standing before him was a figure that seemed to be made of shadows. Its eyes glowed with an unholy light, and its grin was a grotesque parody of a human smile. John tore his gaze from the creature's eyes and looked down at his arm. The grip on his wrist was no longer a hand, but a skeletal claw, its bony fingers digging into his flesh. He screamed again, a primal scream of terror and despair. The creature pulled him closer, its fetid breath washing over his face. John closed his eyes, waiting for the end. But it never came. He opened his eyes to find himself standing in the attic, bathed in the cold light of dawn. The doorless room gaped before him, its darkness beckoning. John stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest. He had escaped, but for how long? The new owner. The for sale sign went up at the end of the week. No one asked why he was selling, not that he had an explanation that wouldn't land him in the psych ward. A young couple, giddy with excitement, bought the house the following week. John tried to warn them, to tell them about the doorless room, the whispers, the shadows, but the words caught in his throat. What could he say? He had no proof, no explanation that wouldn't make him sound insane, so he said nothing. He simply watched as the couple signed the papers, their faces filled with the same excitement he had felt just a few short weeks ago. John drove away from 13 Harbinger Lane, never to return. As he looked in the rearview mirror, he could have sworn he saw a figure standing in the attic window, a tall, gaunt figure with a grotesque grin. And as he drove into the sunrise, John couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't escaped at all. He had simply passed the curse on to someone else.